but I've seen a need for kind of making these arguments and building out these arguments and an increasing sort of energy and thirst for this stuff. And because I think people recognize geopolitically at home that the old ways we were doing things just don't fit. You know, whatever you thought 20 years ago, it's clear they don't make sense anymore.
Welcome to Hell. Cast. Rediscovering the warrior spirit within. Serious times ahead. But we can do this. We have to. We have to.
But here's the thing. China has enormous goals. And its first, I think, big goal is to dominate Asia. And here are the facts, too. Asia is going to be upwards of 50% of global GDP. And he who dominates over 50% of global GDP is going to dominate our economy, right? And thus our society. So there's this idea that we could just pull back and have autarky at home but that's just not how it's going to work. Because I mean, go back to that realism, go back to that conservative insight that people are not angels. Well, if they've got over 50% of global GDP, what are they going to do with it? And we don't have to speculate because they're already behaving that way. You know, look at things like TikTok and look how they behave at home. So this is by far the most profound danger that we face, and I just don't see the urgency in our system at all, and that really makes me, frankly, furious.
There's an idea that we can kind of pull back onshore, build semiconductors, build pharmaceuticals, and we'll be fine in like Fortress America. And I'm not against that like in principle, I just don't think it works, right? So what's going to happen is the Chinese are going to create a huge soft empire, basically. And then they're going to be the gatekeepers. And they're going to be like, don't trade with the Americans and don't buy their products unless you play ball. And the Europeans are weak and fractious, and they're going to play ball with the Chinese. Ditto with Latin America and the Middle East. War has not fundamentally changed. At the end of the day, a lot of these are going to turn into bloodbaths. And that's true on land in particular. Naval and aerospace warfare tends to be high capital intensive. It benefits technology. I mean, you go back to the British Empire and stuff, I mean, not to get it wax eloquent, but we're better off if we're holding a line in the ocean.
There's almost an arrogance in that. There's a sort of a hubris, right? Because it presumes that the Chinese would never think they could beat the Americans, right? If they think they can beat us, why wouldn't they either precipitate a conflict or start one, or just threaten one and everybody know how it resolved? I mean, people who say that the Chinese wouldn't start a war, to me, or wouldn't risk a major war, remind me of the people who said before 2008 there could never be another depression.
They are building a huge military, not for Taiwan, but to project power. They're building bases. They want to build a base in the Atlantic Ocean. They're building aircraft carriers. They're building a space architecture. They're building nuclear-powered submarines. It is crystal clear. That's a military like what we have. And I mean, I think I can say this on this. You didn't want to be ticking us off over the last couple of decades because like we could really come down on you. Oh, I hate war. Like that, war is horrible, right? Like I mean, I view myself as anti-war, but like if you're anti-war, if the rational assessment is that avoiding war requires deterring it, which I think is true, and a conservative or realist view of human nature suggests that people will be aggressive if it's in their interest, well then you have to prepare for war. I mean, it's like it's one of these cliches, but it's a cliche for a reason. I mean, you go back to Washington or the Romans or whatever.
I think of conservatism and realism as kind of cognate, like they're pretty similar in my conception. I mean, in the sense that I really try to go back and you know, the world, people are not perfectible, you know, large, you know, grandiose social projects are unlikely to pan out well. You know, you're supposed to look after the people closest to you, family, citizenry, etc. That's sort of the basic idea. It's a tough world, it's a competitive place out there. There's a lot of dangers. You got to be realistic about that. And I think, look, we got hubristic. And that was true of the Democrats, but it was also true of the Republicans. I mean, you know, you go back and you look at some of the things, an end to evil. I mean, ending tyranny in the world. I mean, these are things, you know, they might be noble in a certain way, but I think, you know, I've actually got a piece coming out in First Things kind of laying out this sort of moral case from my point of view. I don't think it's moral at the end of the day to do things that are unwise or imprudent. I mean, not to get into the religion too much, but, you know, I was in the church earlier this month, and there's Luke 12 and Jesus talking about stewardship. And I think that's the sort of mindset that I bring, that this is not only some sort of cold, heartless, you know, playing on a game board. This is actually what's what's moral and prudent. And I go back to first principles about what is our foreign policy about. Well, I think it's pretty similar to our domestic policy. It's about the American people's physical security, their freedom, and their prosperity, which are, of course, linked. And again, I think it's true on the Democrat side, but sadly, it's also true on the Republican side, where people are acting like, hey, we can take on Russia and China and Iran and North Korea. No. That's just factually untrue. We don't have a military that's capable for that. And by the way, Heritage has been pointing out for years that we haven't been spending enough on defense. Well, now we're living in that world. So let's act like, I'm not saying that's good, but are we going to deal with reality, for the American people's interests, or are we going to kind of live in this dream world that we wish might have been? No, I don't think that's doing the American people, what they deserve. Yeah, there's an interesting dichotomy. I mean, there is a blob. And with all due respect, I've worked with a lot of senior, general and officers and admirals. People can become disconnected, and I'll say this, I mean, and I'm, as prey to this as anybody else who lives in the Beltway. It's, in some ways, Washington is like the imperial capital. That's how our allies treat it. And if you're part of that imperial system, whether you're officially so in the State Department or you're part of the think tank circuit, it's pretty, it's pretty amazing, that people come and listen to you and think you're so important and they, you're so wise and we need you, America. And that can, there's a corrupting element to that. I don't mean literally, well, I mean sort of morally, not financial. Well, there may be financial elements in some cases, but it's something that it's not actually in the American people's interests, Some of it is. But I think, what Tom Spohr is pointing to is exactly right. A number of, people like Jim Banks have been pointing to. I mean, whether it's, the wokeism craziness, more than craziness, terror, whether it's some of the vaccination mandates, I don't know, but there's clearly something going on. I mean, the Afghanistan withdrawal, where there's a major decline in recruitment, and that's just one manifestation that's particularly noticeable. I mean, our defense industrial base has really atrophied, which kind of drives me crazy because we're spending a huge 3.5% of our income, all of us, every year. We should get more bang for our buck. And the administration likes to say, oh, well, we can walk and chew gum at the same time, which drives me nuts. Because, is dealing with China walking or chewing gum? How about, sprinting a marathon or wrestling a dragon? That would give you the right order of magnitude kind of analogy.
That was the correct metaphor.
That would be like, oh, wow, okay, that sounds a little crazy. Yeah, that's what dealing with China is.